Hello, I'm delighted to be launching our new video series, Crowe Corner. This is where we discuss topics and issues that are important to our clients. In each episode, we'll be joined by our clients and also other specialists. Today, we are launching our first three-part special as part of Family Business Week. My name is Stephen Edwards. I'm a partner in the Recovery Solutions team at Crowe, and we assist companies that are in financial distress, and we try to identify solutions where to assist a business to thrive and prosper. This is an area that no family business necessarily wants to acknowledge may happen, but in the current environment, it's of use, I think, just to have an understanding of where businesses stand and where directors should seek advice. Today, I'm joined by Joanna Ford. Joanna's a partner of Cripps LLP, a firm of solicitors, and Joe specialises in insolvency and restructuring. Hello, Joe.
Hi.
I have a couple of questions just for discussion points when it comes down to family business. And when they first approach you as a lawyer seeking legal advice, what do you think most concerns directors when they're seeking advice for their insolvent business?
Well, I think the first thing to mention is this is often something that the directors have never had to deal with before. Hopefully it's a kind of a once in a lifetime is that event. So they're obviously very worried and they are looking to do their best by the company and all its stakeholders. I think one of the things that concerns directors the most is, particularly as they're also owners of the business, will be actually losing their investment. So their investment into the business, something that they may have built up over many, many years. It could be something that has been in the family for generations even, and losing control of that business as well if it goes into insolvency, and it can signal the end of the business. So I think that is really concerning for them.
Indeed. So there's a fair amount of hand-holding and guiding people through the process to make sure that they're not tripping up and finding themselves in a position where they create a risk for themselves when they're actually dealing with the affairs of that business. I suppose as well, you have a director of a family business or any business that's wearing different hats as well. So they have a position where they're trying to manage what's right for the company, and then that's also what's right for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is another real concern, is that risk of personal liability that they have, but the wearing different hats. You know, they could be a shareholder in the business, they could be a director, also possibly an employee, or they could have family members who are employees as well. And that's actually, it's difficult at the best of times to be taking off different hats and trying to put yourselves in just your director's shoes without having to think about your interests of shareholders. But in the family business, I think that's even more difficult.
No, I'd absolutely agree. So my second question, Joe, what's the biggest surprise, do you think, when you're advising a director of a family business when they're considering what options are available to them? Is there anything in particular that always puts directors maybe on a little bit of a back foot?
I think sometimes what can surprise directors is the shift in the priority of who they need to take into account. So on insolvency, the creditor's interests, as we know, become paramount. And I think that is something that directors have a hard time getting their head around, because they've spent all these years focusing on the success of the business, the shareholders and all the rest of it. And to start having to think about creditors, and particularly maybe creditors that they may not really want to pay, such as HMRC, I think that's a really tough thing to get their head around. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think that's my experience as well. When you're sat in front of a director and making them understand that everybody should be treated equally.
Exactly.
That there's nobody that takes precedence one type of claim over another when it comes down to standard trade debt and that of trade and expense creditors and directors' loans, for instance.
Yes, exactly.
I also find that when we're dealing with a family business, you often have a position where the directors are drawing their salaries as dividends.
Yeah.
That causes problems as well at times, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, because it's increasing their potentially increasing their liabilities to the company. You've got to be careful about actually declaring the dividends. You've got to make sure that all the relevant rules are followed. So if there is, for any reason, if they're not followed, and for example, if you've got obviously a business in distress, then they're not going to have sufficient distributable profits to be able to declare a dividend. So the director then taking that money out of the company is going to be unlawful, and they could incur personal liability for that, couldn't they?
Yeah, indeed. And there are claims that are often made against insolvent businesses for exactly that, recouping monies that shouldn't have been paid out to shareholders.
Yeah.
So it's very important for directors, when declaring the distribution, that they actually have the reserves in the business in the first place.
Exactly, which they're obviously not going to do if they're insolvent.
Indeed, no, that's quite right. So we've identified that there's risks of directors becoming personally liable for an insolvent business's debts. When you're in front of a director, what advice do you normally give to try and address those risks so they're reduced as much as possible?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things is always, and it sounds a little bit self-serving for both of us, but it's not, but taking professional advice is super important, because the directors are then acknowledging that they maybe don't have that specialist expertise and they need to get that specialist expertise. If they then follow that advice, then that gives them quite a significant degree of protection. Yeah,
no, I'd agree with that. Whenever we see directors, it's quite often a hand-holding exercise just to make sure that the actions that the board are taking are appropriate and can't be attacked. And at the end of the day, nobody wants to see directors exposed where it was unnecessary. Yeah. So I think you're right, that the services that you and I are able to provide to guide directors along the appropriate path would always be the right one.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think also reminding them that it's perfectly legitimate for, even though the business is in distress and doesn't, is potentially insolvent, that it's still okay to pay for that advice out of the company, because that is a reasonable and a proper thing to do to make sure that they're not breaching their duties.
Indeed. And quite often I find when we're instructed, the advice that we give is that maybe sometimes it is appropriate to pay certain liabilities.
Exactly.
If that's looking to preserve that business and to make sure that the creditors' interests are properly looked after.
Yeah.
So it's never a black and white decision.
No.
And there's often a case where there's substantial middle ground, but the guidance needs to be there to make sure that's appropriate.
Exactly. I mean, the other thing I also recommend that directors do is have regular board meetings, even if it's informal, discussions. It can be over the telephone, and then making sure that the decisions they made are properly minuted and recorded. Because a lot of family businesses operate on a fairly informal basis ordinarily, and in good times, that's obviously not a problem. But when you're in circumstances where somebody else may be scrutinising the company's records, it's really helpful to have a proper record of what was discussed and why they took the decisions they did.
Jo, thank you very much for coming along and answering those questions. I'm really grateful. That's been a great insight as to where directors need to concentrate their efforts if they find themselves in a insolvent position. Join us next time for our second instalment of Crowe Corner for Family Business Week. Thank you.